It was a humid night in an isolated village at the foot of ancient mountains, in a forgotten corner of African Transylvania. For years, the community avoided the streets after sunset and boarded up windows with thick planks. It all began when a group of hunters, not farmers as in the original script, disappeared during a monstrous storm. One of them, young Amon, 23 years old, was found at the forest's edge, utterly shocked, murmuring about carnivorous figures and screams emanating from the fog. Local authorities, a discredited municipal guard named Lukman, tried to contain the panic, but a sense of death loomed over the village. In the following nights, residents reported strange sounds, ropes creaking like dried entrails, heavy footsteps among the trees, whispered laughter coming from different directions. An elderly couple, Miriam and Tahir, claimed to have heard a dry snap beside their bed while they slept, and upon turning on the light saw scratch marks on the door frame, yet nothing on the floor, as if the creature had vanished into thin air. A local history teacher, reimagined here as Renata, a change in gender and name profession, decided to spend an entire night watching the village entrance. She set up makeshift cameras and recorded doors closing by themselves, and in one of the videos noticed an arched shadow that walked slowly through the empty streets, ignoring lamps and torches. The suspense escalated when children began to disappear on the outskirts, always around 3 in the morning. A 9-year-old boy was found days later, sitting in front of an abandoned house, babbling that the empty-eyed carrion wanted to take him to the other side of the trees. When found, his body was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes indescribably sunken, as if they had been removed. The village's anguish grew in the face of collective fear. Who would dare walk the dark streets? Who would dare press the flashlight button? The nights became encyclopedias of terror, with whispers, strange reflections, echoes that did not belong to sleep. Meanwhile, reports of mutilated bodies emerged in hidden alleys. A lumberjack named Davoud, 62 years old, had part of his arm ripped off. Flesh remains were discovered around twisted footprints. Upon touching these marks, the local police felt a cutting cold, as if the trees were breathing. Renata began to connect the dots. It wasn't a wolf, nor a common predator. It seemed something prehistoric, Dantesque, hungry for human pain. What if these tracks were living proof of an ancient creature, emerging with every storm? Days after the disappearance of 3 more young people, 2 brothers aged 14 and 16, and an 8-month pregnant woman, the village's atmosphere collapsed. The sky seemed constantly overcast with dense clouds, as if the very air was being sucked away by an invisible force. Renata began receiving anonymous messages left under her door, scribbles with symbols in dried blood, phrases like, "You woke the sleep of the earth," and drawings of humanoid figures with sewn mouths. She decided to investigate the village's ancient stories further. She discovered, in a deteriorated diary from 1862, that the region had been built over a ritualistic cemetery of a forgotten cult that practiced invocations based on the consumption of human voices. Yes, they didn't drink blood, they didn't devour flesh, they consumed voices, stealing the sound of the soul. This explained the bodies without vocal cords, without eyes, and the reports of surviving victims who were completely mute, as if their throats had been sealed from the inside. Meanwhile, chaos intensified. One night, the entire village woke to the sound of a collective laughter coming from the thicket. It was as if dozens of people were hidden among the trees, laughing in unison with an unnatural synchronicity. When the bravest went out with torches to investigate, they found a clearing where, in the center, a rag doll hung upside down. Around it, 20 pairs of shoes, all belonging to the disappeared children. On the doll, a note. The offering was not enough. Panic, despair. Renata gathered a small group of still rational residents and proposed fleeing. But then came the final blow. They discovered that all the cars had been destroyed during the night. The engines were filled with putrid flesh and coarse hair, as if an animal had laid inside them and dissolved there. Communication lines were also dead. The radios only emitted sounds of accelerated footsteps and heavy breathing. At the peak of tension, the creature finally revealed itself. On a suffocating dawn, a scream echoed for almost 5 uninterrupted minutes. The scream was not from a person. It was a mixture of twisted iron, childish crying, and something that sounded like a female lament. Renata and her group ran to the barn, where they saw the silhouette. It was 2.5 meters tall, with elongated arms as if they had been stretched by torture. And where a face should be, there was an opening, a dark hole that absorbed the surrounding light. The creature slowly turned its head, and even at that distance, everyone felt their throats burn as if they were being suffocated from within. They fled. 3 couldn't resist and fell there, screaming until their voices completely vanished, leaving only their mouths open in eternal silence. Renata ran through a forest she didn't know and reached the entrance of a hidden cave among the roots of a twisted baobab tree. Inside, she found dozens of skulls with circular holes in their throats, the entity's seal. Does the story end here? Perhaps not. Perhaps the creature is still out there, in other villages, disguised among the darkness of sounds you don't hear, waiting for its next offering. If you've made it this far and are unnerved or breathless, it's because this story managed to touch you. So, do this. Subscribe to the channel, but not out of obligation. Subscribe because this is for you if you miss real horror. And comment one thing. If you lost your voice right now, what would you stop telling the world? Answer me in the comments. That's how we build this community of heavy story enthusiasts. No top or so scary comments. Give me a piece of your story. The second story takes place in Kaumusjärvi, an isolated village in northern Finland, where the sun disappears for entire weeks during winter. There, in the complete polar silence, lived a man named Elias Tuomi, a retired fisherman who lived alone since the mysterious death of his wife 7 years ago. No one knew for sure how she had died. Her body was never found, only a jawless skeleton in the middle of a frozen lake. During January, Elias began to notice small changes in his wooden house. Objects moved, noises came from the basement, which incidentally had been sealed with rusty planks for over a decade. But what disturbed him most was the sound of dragging. Footsteps in the attic, which started every night at precisely 2:33 a.m. Trying to ignore it, Elias blamed his age. But everything changed when he found, hanging on his bedroom mirror, a note written in blood. "She is still cold." In the following days, the temperature inside the house began to drop drastically, even with the heater on maximum. The thermometer read 30-9 degrees, an abnormal cold even for Lapland standards. The windows began to fog up with words written from the inside, inverted messages like, "Why did you leave me in the ice?" and "The heart does not freeze, hatred does." Elias decided to reopen the basement, a fatal mistake. The old wood almost turned to dust when he pulled out the nails. Downstairs, he found dozens of stuffed birds, all with their eyes gouged out and their wings tied with human hair. There was also a wedding dress covered in a thick layer of black ice, pulsing slowly, as if something alive was inside it. When he touched the dress, he heard his wife's voice for the first time in years. Only she didn't call his name. She screamed, and she said a word he didn't know. Ratalu, which in the ancient local language means ritual dismemberment. The village, according to forgotten legends, was built on the site where women accused of witchcraft were dismembered alive, and their hearts thrown into the lakes so they would not be reborn. That same night, Elias woke to the sound of water dripping on the ceiling. He slowly climbed up with only a flashlight and found an absolutely grotesque scene. His wife was there, or at least something with her face. Her skin was gray, her eyes were completely white, and her mouth was sewn shut with fishing line. She didn't walk. She dragged herself on the ceiling, with claws stuck in the wood, like an inverted spider. And most terrifying, there were dozens of hearts hanging on fishhooks, slowly bleeding into buckets. When she saw him, she stopped. She opened her sewn mouth in a dry movement, tearing the flesh, and said, "You let me die in pieces. Now it will be your turn, one by one." Elias tried to run, but the stairs disappeared. The attic had transformed into a room with no doors, only windows sealed by thick ice. The last thing heard coming from that house was a desperate breath, the sound of flesh being pulled, and a muffled scream that lasted exactly 6 minutes and 16 seconds. The local police found the house frozen to the roof. Inside, only a rocking chair slowly spinning, and an analog recorder. When they played it, they heard a single phrase, repeated 216 times. "He is here now. You will be next." Since then, Elias's house has been abandoned. But they say that if you pass by it during the polar night, you will see a figure standing in the attic, with eyes shining like rusty lighthouses and a hand holding a still pulsating heart. Now tell me, could you sleep in a house that holds the pain of a spirit frozen by its own truth? Comment below. What's the strangest place where you felt like you weren't alone? It could be a forest, a hotel room, a childhood home. It doesn't have to be a long story. I just want to know if you've ever had that feeling in your stomach, like someone was watching you when you swore you were alone. And if you haven't subscribed, it's now or never. Here, the horror isn't cheap jump scares. Here, we mess with what's inside you. So click to join our community of wide-eyed and locked-door enthusiasts. Just come. The third story takes place in Ishinomaki, a city on the northeast coast of Japan, a place marked by natural disasters and by an institution now avoided even by its own residents. The old Yamashiro Hospital, decommissioned since 1994 after a series of inexplicable deaths and disappearances within its psychiatric wards. The hospital was built over an ancient underground war base, and some say the foundations still carry the screams of those who were silently executed down there. The 5-story building is hidden by dense forest, and access is almost impossible by ordinary road. But that didn't stop Hikaru Ishida, an amateur documentarian, from trying to explore the site with 2 friends, hoping to get exclusive footage for his channel about cursed places. They entered the hospital at 11:47 p.m. with flashlights, cameras, and an infrasound capture device. On the first floor, they found medical records still in the archives. Many names crossed out with red ink, room numbers erased, and a ward locked with chains and symbols carved with scalpels on the wall, which none of the group could identify. They looked like ideograms, but with excessively circular curves and drawings of eyes and sewn mouths. At exactly midnight, the batteries of 2 cell phones died simultaneously. Hikaru's camera, which recorded in full HD, began to register only static and a hissing sound with something that sounded like a child whispering. They thought about leaving, but the friend carrying the map, Takeshi, disappeared. They searched for him on all floors. They went up to the last one, where the seclusion ward was. It was there that they found what was left of him, a body suspended from the ceiling by surgical threads, with his eyes gouged out and sewn into his own mouth. On the wall, written in blood, a phrase, "You saw what you shouldn't have." As they tried to escape, the doors began to slam shut by themselves. Sounds of screams echoed from the basement, even though there was no visible access to the underground floor. But the elevator door opened by itself. Inside, only one person could fit at a time. An obvious risk, but the fear was greater. Hikaru went first. The door closed, and instead of going down, the elevator began to ascend to the 6th floor, which, according to records, didn't exist. When the door opened, he saw a long corridor lit by orange-toned lamps. In the background, a wooden door carved with human bones attached with nails. On the other side of that door, voices murmured. And then he saw patients from all eras, sewn to each other by their flesh, forming a living, pulsating circle around. An iron bathtub full of a black substance. In the center of the tub, a faceless child, lying in a fetal position. And floating in the air, a single human eye, which stared at him. She was born from the pain of all who forgot the pain. That was the only phrase he heard before passing out. Hikaru was found 3 days later, naked, with his tongue ripped out and his pupils dilated, 11 kilometers away from the hospital, in the middle of the road to Sendai. He remembered nothing, but on his neck was tattooed with a scar the word Uketsugu, which means to inherit the curse. The camera video was partially recovered, and it shows a single frame where something can be seen clearly. Behind Hikaru, in the reflection of a broken mirror, appears the image of Takeshi, standing, smiling, with his eyes back in place. They say that whoever watches the video to the end has nightmares of an empty room where there is only a phone ringing non-stop. And that if you answer, you will hear a voice that only asks, "Do you want to remember or forget?" Made it this far? Then comment now. What object or symbol gives you the most chills? A doll? A mirror? A half-open door in the dark? I want to know what your instinct avoids without even thinking. Let's see how far your courage goes. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Here, every story carries scars that don't heal, and every account can be a mirror of what you yourself try to forget. Come be part of this journey where horror isn't just told, it's felt. In the confines of the Andes Mountains, in a remote and almost inaccessible stretch between Chile and Argentina, lies the ruin of a prison called La Cava Negra. Officially, it never existed. It was built in the 1930s to house criminals considered unfit for humanity. Among them, ritual murderers, soldiers involved with esoteric experiments, and people no one wanted to see judged. Inside, there were no rules. Only hunger, cold, darkness, and what lived in Gallery Zero. La Cava Negra was discovered by chance in 2017 by a group of geology students exploring inactive caves. One of them, Daniel Ferreira, found a stone staircase that led to what looked like a Nazi bunker, but the smell was of dried blood, and the drawings on the walls didn't resemble anything seen on Earth. In the center of the circular cell was a well, and inside it, water completely still and black as oil. Around the well, rusty chains attached to human rings, bones forming mandalas, and inscriptions with inverted letters in Old Spanish. And as if time had stopped, there were also the marks of the burned hands of the ancient prisoners, still imprinted on the walls as a signature of the horror they lived. One of the students, Camilo, heard voices coming from the well. He said he heard someone calling his name with his father's voice, who had died 3 years ago. He was the first to disappear. When Daniel and the others looked for him, they found his body folded in half with all internal bones removed as if he had been squeezed from the inside out. His eyes were open, but there was no eyeball, only liquid darkness running like ink. They tried to leave the place, but the path they used to enter had simply vanished. Behind the iron door that brought them there, now there was only a raw stone wall, without cracks, without gaps, as if space itself had reconfigured. The only exit was the well. Daniel left the camera recording while the others discussed, and he captured a sound, something between a hum and a male choral chant. When one of his friends, Tomas, brought his face close to the edge of the well to see better, something pulled him, but not forcefully. His body just slipped inside, as if he had given up resisting. There was no sound of a fall, only an abrupt silence. The recording ends with Daniel screaming, "It's not water, it's not water," and then nothing. A week later, a rescue team sent by helicopter found only the camera. The bodies were never found, but inside the camera, in the last audio file, there were 11 seconds of static, and a phrase in a low voice, as if speaking at the ear. They wanted to be forgotten, but now they know they were found. Since then, the region has been interdicted. But residents of nearby villages report sounds of chains dragging during the night, echoes of whispered prayers, and figures walking in the fields. One of them claims to have seen a person with the face of 3 of his deceased relatives at the same time, looking at him from across the road. The most disturbing thing is that since the discovery of the place, several names of old missing persons began to appear on posters and police files dated 1947, as if the prison were reactivating its files, as if it had come back to life. And you? Are you sure you have no connection to this place? If this story gave you chills, or made you look twice into the dark, this is your cue. Subscribe to the channel. But here's the request the way we like it. No frills, no fuss, just from those who share the same taste for stories that stick to the skin. Here there's no cheap scare. There's real dread. There's presence. There's weight. And if you've made It this far, it's because you carry a piece of this abyss too. So subscribe, because this community doesn't just listen, it responds. And very well. Now tell me, have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Something that made you doubt reality? Write your story in the comments. This space is yours, and we read everything. Here, you're not just a spectator, you're part of the ritual. And before you go, tell me, what did these stories teach you? About fear, about courage, or about what's best left locked inside yourself?